Welcome to the Tuesday, October 26th edition, pre-Halloween edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, brought to you by WynnBET. I'm Joe Bartlett. Follow me at JB Fantasy Sports, along with Jake Letarski at RotoJake. We'll get into the Monday night game, get into a bit of a, I think, mundane Week 8 waiver wire claims and everything else like that. Before we do so, let's get a word from our title sponsors, WynnBET. If there's one thing we appreciate here at RotoWire, it's making good decisions, even more so with making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with RotoWire's newest partner, WynnBET. The premier digital casino and sports app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, online bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more right at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? We can head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down on blackjack, slam the slots before even trying to head to baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all RotoWire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive sponsor and also partner for RotoWire's fantasy podcast. All right, Jake, with that being said, I'm glad to know that you're here with me. You didn't sleep through the Seahawks and Saints game, which was a horrible Monday night game for many reasons, but I'll let you go ahead and go into it first.
Yeah, so, I mean, my initial thought was I think the return of the Manning cast may have saved this one. The presence of Marshawn Lynch was a treat, of course, as always. And, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to take away from this. Of course, the weather didn't seem to help things. Both quarterbacks seemed to play quite poorly, for the most part. I guess you could say Jameis did just enough. I mean, DK Metcalf was really the only Seahawk who got it on, just one big play, really, that, right. He was, Gino just kind of threw it up to him and Lattimore fell down kind of, and DK took it right to the house, and that got his fantasy day. But I know a lot of people were excited about the return of Alex Collins, and of course he dominated the carries with 16, but overall the backfield was split up like a lot, and way too much for most fantasy owners to be comfortable with. Collins had 22 snaps to lead the way. Rashard Penny, back from IR, he's been a fantasy name that's been around for a number of years. Is he going to be good? Maybe not. Travis Homer had 12. Like I said, Penny had 19, and DJ Dallas was only out there for 1. So people thinking maybe Travis Homer or rolling out Alex Collins, that waited, were sorely disappointed. And then on the other side, it was pretty much the Alvin Kamara game that, we had all been waiting for. It was crazy. They continued to try to run him between the tackles, and Seattle, whose defense I don't think all that highly of, at all. They're typically one that you target in fantasy matchups. They
right.
couldn't run between the tackles, but they kept trying to do it. I mean, Kamara had 20 carries for 51 yards. But what happened here at the end of the first half, they went on a drive, they had to score quick, and they suddenly just kept throwing the ball to Kamara on, 7 to 10 yard routes, and it was working amazingly. So he ends up catching 10 of his 11 targets for 128 receiving yards in his score. I mean, this is the Kamara that we're normally used to. There is no real true between the tackles back here. So I do worry about the usage a little bit down the stretch, but I think Kamara is going to be, just fine. It's top 5, definitely top 10 fantasy back.
I'm sitting here really annoyed as you're going through things because I was going to have a pretty good fantasy week. And honestly, I still did. A lot of the leagues I care about I'm successful in. I was able to successfully navigate by them again. And honestly, quite frankly, it was based on the conversation that you and I had throughout the week preparing for these free agent waiver wires. And so thank you for that, Jake. I needed 3 things to occur. I needed Alvin Kamara not to get 32 points in a full point PPR league. He had that by halftime. So there's one loss. I needed DK Metcalf to get 22 points. First play of the game, we have 16 points. He can only get 2 the rest of the 58 minutes of the game. That's ridiculous.
I looked in the box score like some point in the second half, and I was like, DK only has that 1 target. That's weird. I mean, so I saw this take on Twitter, but, imagine, being Geno Smith and the Seahawks, and, you go a whole entire game and you only target Metcalf and Lockett a combined 8 times. I mean, Freddie Swain led the way in targets with 6. And, it's a run team. They have to be a run team when Geno's, the quarterback there. Because,
I disagree. I mean, I should say this. The last thing I needed was DJ Dallas and Tyler Lockett to get 6.8 points. 6.8 points between DJ Dallas and Tyler Lockett, and they couldn't do it. Like
1 snap for DJ Dallas. I mean,
oh my God.
Was the option to pivot to Homer or even Penny available?
I didn't. It was NFFC where you have 12 teams and 10-man benches, and we just didn't have anything else left. It was like that was my flex play And whatever, if that was a low scoring game, NFFC cares more about the overall total points, and I think we're slacking there anyway. So win doesn't make a difference. I was making the point on SiriusXM just moments ago. If you are the Seahawks offense, you cannot tell me, even with how incompetent you might believe Geno Smith is, that you can't get more offense involved for DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. If you can't scheme targets, I don't even know if they have to catch it. If you can't scheme targets for those two players of that caliber, there is no point of you being an offensive coordinator in the NFL. Literally no point. Like that should not be an issue. And yet we had run, pass, and then they had a punt. That was that. All those runs, I wasn't kidding. I think it was 7 and then a pass. That consisted of basically 3 drives, which ended the game for the Seahawks. That was a bad game. And I don't even care about the weather conditions. I'm pissed.
Yeah. You're right. You make a good point that DK Metcalf is kind of a jump, and you can throw the ball up to him. He's a perfectly capable jump ball receiver, because there is nobody. I don't think there's a corner in the league. Maybe someone throw it in the comments, but I don't think there's a corner in the league that can match up with DK Metcalf one-on-one from a physical standpoint. DK is stronger than you are if you're an NFL defensive back of just about any. So I can understand Lockett having, bad games. You got to think about even putting him on the bench for as long as Geno Smith is the quarterback here, but there's really no excuse for not using your best offensive weapon. And, when Russell Wilson's on the sidelines, there's no question in my mind that DK Metcalf is their best offensive weapon. And, Metcalf owners can't complain a ton because he did still end up having a good game due to the one big play, but I would love to see more usage out of him. Definitely.
Yeah, it was just a frustrating game, and I didn't have the benefit of listening to the Manning cast. I was watching on cable, so therefore, I guess I could have turned on, but whatever. That was an ugly game, and I think the weather conditions are going to pretend as if they were a bigger deal with this, and I really don't think. I think it's incompetent play calling from the Seahawks perspective, and then incompetent defense. Again, I didn't even get a chance to rant enough about Alvin Kamara. You had mentioned that drive towards the end of the half. Literally, there's one person beating you as the Seahawks defense, and then you just choose to not cover him really at any point in the game, but certainly that drive. That was just like okay, great.
I mean, for those who didn't see it, the touchdown was basically Jameis fumbled the snap, picked it up with one hand and threw it to a wide open Kamara. They're with all of that going on, there was no time to put up any kind of, somewhat formidable defense there. So yeah, you would definitely have the right to be frustrated if you're a Seattle fan.
Yeah, I can't believe it. Definitely not one of the great primetime games that we have thus far. So, all right, well, let's move into the actual portion of the podcast that people are tuning in for, the Waiver Wire edition. And unfortunately, not that I want to have people tune out on this podcast necessarily, but I'll just say there's less options than there have been most weeks. And that it stems in part from the fact that we have just 2 teams on bye. Last week, of course, by Apocalypse going on with 6 teams on bye. Just the Ravens and Raiders this week. And honestly, you're talking about Darren Waller, a few Raiders wide receivers, a few Ravens ones.
So hopefully you stick with us to tight ends because there are actual options there. Lamar. So we'll have some streamers. I thought it was a real bad week on the surface, but then I started digging through and I found some decent ads here that are going to help people in fantasy, especially if you're in one of those situations like, I don't know, say you haven't dropped Allen Robinson yet. You're begrudgingly toughing through the Tyler Lockett weeks. You're missing Kareem Hunt. There's some guys that you can definitely get.
Yeah, you're right. And we'll go through a few of them. Before we do, let's take a moment to have a word from our sponsors, Blue Wire. All right, we are back, and I think it's probably best we jump into the quarterbacks right away. Again, we're missing Lamar Jackson. We're missing Derek Carr. Derek Carr, at least for me, has been viable in certain situations. We have the Joe Flacco trade. We have a few injuries that might have opened up the opportunity for a few players. But I think for the most part, people, if you're streaming quarterbacks, you're starting at the top, and I think that would be Daniel Jones.
Yeah, definitely. So it really is a big grab bag for quarterbacks this week. There's a lot of 2 quarterback guys, but you're right. You nailed it. If you are streaming, streaming for Lamar, because I mean, let's face it. If you have Lamar on your roster, you're only carrying 1 quarterback. I ran into that a lot last week. I have Herbert on my roster. I'm only carrying 1 quarterback. There are a lot of quarterbacks in that tier, and Lamar is definitely one of them. So if you need a streamer, Daniel Jones, he's only 28% rostered in Yahoo formats, and he's going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are giving up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks here through 7 weeks. And, they're the 3rd highest yards per attempt. And Daniel Jones has surprisingly actually played pretty well of late. I mean, he had a good fantasy week last week, despite, his receiving core being, completely injured, but, he was turnover free and he even caught a pass. So, I mean, a decent fantasy day here for him. And I'm checking his game log here. It's taking a sec to load here, but he's only had two true duds. One was against the Cowboys when he left early due to injury, and one was against the Rams, and you can't fault him for that. Otherwise, he's got 17 or more fantasy points in every game this season and 2 games of 30-plus points. So he's not bad, and the matchup is excellent here. So if you need a streamer, I think Danny Dimes has to be your first go-to. And with buys not in that dire of shape, you should be able to get away with paying next to nothing for him in Fab.
Yeah, it's funny. Last week you had mentioned Jameis Winston as a top pickup, mainly going against the Seahawks defense. But I was saying I would sooner drop Jameis Winston than go ahead and start him. And you laughed at me. You scoffed at me and said, that's ridiculous. Okay. How do you feel about Jameis Winston now after watching that performance last night?
Listen, man, I had no idea what the weather forecast was going to be a week ago today. I didn't realize it was going to be. It wasn't quite monsoon like the Sunday night game, but it was definitely not conducive to quarterback play. I hope, for my stake league team, that we can get Michael Thomas somewhere in action there. That situation has been weird, but if they can figure out that if Jameis can figure out that he can and should throw the ball to Kamara 10 to 15 times per games, I think his fantasy numbers could get fixed pretty quick.
Yeah, okay. Well, other than the week where I needed them not to, they haven't been. So I ask you this, is Jameis Winston in consideration among Daniel Jones and a few of these other names as a streaming quarterback? Because you were convinced last week Jameis Winston was going to be a guy that you could use for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And I was saying, no, he sucks. The Saints offense sucks. And I feel confirmed last night. I don't care about the weather. You can use that as an excuse. I think that's more or less what that offense is without Michael Thomas right now.
Yeah, if you need a 1 week streamer, I guess I'd go with Daniel Jones over Winston, so you can make that one-on-one drop. But the upcoming schedule still is pretty beautiful for Jameis. I mean, Tampa Bay is giving up the 25th, is ranked 25 against opposing quarterbacks. Atlanta is 29, and Tennessee is 27, even after shutting down Patrick Mahomes the past week. So it's a very nice schedule, like especially if you're in a 2 quarterback league, or if you're waiting for Russell Wilson or someone to get back and you miss out on Danny Dimes. I don't mind necessarily rolling Jameis out there. I mean, he still got 19 fantasy points last night, and his lowest score is 13, and he's had 2 games of over 30 fantasy points as well. So he didn't pass the eye test last night, no doubt about that, but he's serviceable, and he's got a good. I'm not ready to necessarily cut bait unless there's an immediate, like a Daniel Jones, and you only need it for 1 week, or someone. I've seen Tua show up on a lot of streaming, on a lot of waiver wire thing. I didn't really think of that necessarily, but he's a better fantasy quarterback than he is a real life quarterback. There's definitely no doubt about that. His receiving core is getting healthier. And I mean, the last 2 weeks, 26.7, 33.5 fantasy points. The only problem is Buffalo this week. I mean, that's going to be a mess. You got to hold out until Houston the week after, maybe. So, just some streamers to think about there.
Are there any other guys that we should mention? Again, we talked about Daniel Jones, Jameis Winston, Tua. I think that kind of is the list of the bottom of the barrel quarterbacks, but anybody else we should be kind of targeting or thinking about at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I said, it's a grab bag this week. So I'm just gonna go through them all in quick hitters and guys that maybe want to think about because we're already almost 15 minutes in. This is a part of the show that's a very niche audience here. So let's run down the list. So in case you missed it, Zac Wilson out 2 to 4 weeks with a PCL injury. Mike White was the guy who came back in for him, but they also acquired Joe Flacco, and I believe Flacco was there
last year.
And he's worked with that with those coaches in the past, is my understanding.
I'm not positive he's worked with I forget which LaFleur is now. Is it Mike LaFleur, whatever? There's a different LaFleur over as the offense coordinator. I'm not sure he's worked with them, but obviously he's familiar with New York given his time spent last season.
Yeah, so obviously any Jets and anyone named Joe Flacco doesn't get you excited from a fantasy standpoint, but you know how popular 2 quarterback leagues are. We have to mention that. And for a similar reasoning, I mean, Case Keenum, he could be in play again. Baker Mayfield didn't practice at all on Monday, still dealing with that injury, so we don't know exactly how he's doing. Tyrod Taylor is going to practice on Wednesday. He's kind of coming back off the IR from that hamstring injury. Upcoming is versus the Rams, and then Miami, and then bye. So, it's not the greatest upcoming for him, but, he's a warm body who they believe will be the starter when they come back. And he even had a decent week 1 for the Texans. So you never know. Maybe you can get 10, 15 points in your 2 quarterback league and or hope for the best in that situation. I was checking out Jim Coventry's XM show, and he mentioned, well, maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick will be back after the week 9 bye. It's way long term, but he he's someone that, I guess you kind of got to put on your radar, on your watch list to make sure he comes back, because he's definitely taking that job back from Taylor Heineke when that day comes. And then this one's a long shot, and there's a lot going on with this guy. But I don't know, Deshaun Watson there's been rumblings like he's getting closer to getting traded. Obviously, that depends on the situation. But, hey, I've seen 16-team 2-quarterback leagues, and if you have a bench spot, go for it. I guess he would probably be your first drop if you had to make a tough call. But but I don't know. There's I still think he can play. Like, I don't think he just decided to get out of shape over these last 12 weeks. I think we'll find out
next week with the trade deadline. If he's not traded, he's not going to be playing. If he is traded, he probably will play.
Yeah. So,
it's either the NFL signs off on it.
Yeah. So basically it's either wait for him to get traded, then have to pay a bunch of fab for him,
or do it ahead of time. Yep.
Or do it ahead of time and get him for nothing. So that's kind of why he makes the list. But like I said, it's a grab bag, quick hitters, bunch of different situations going on with quarterbacks. Most of this is really for 2-quarterback leagues here. But the only, even in shallower 1-quarterback leagues, Daniel Dimes should be your first choice to stream. I think that's the big takeaway here.
Right on. And I completely agree with you in terms of the overview of those quarterbacks, and Daniel Jones specifically is the top target. Let's move over to running backs. Last week, we talked about McKissick, who ended up doing okay. I mean, you and I were both at that game. I kept telling my wife, who was with me at that one, that it's going to be Terry McLaurin, watch number 17. Of course, McLaurin gets the touchdown on the first drive, and she was like, oh, okay, so you're going to be annoying all game. I'm like, yep, I am. And then I said, watch 41 out of the backfield, McKissick. I actually was surprised didn't do as much as I was anticipating, but it was enough to be fantasy relevant. I think the Dearness Johnson, Demetric Felton combo, which we had to kind of try to grapple with on a Tuesday when we didn't have a lot of information about Nick Chubb's stats, ended up being really beneficial for Dearness Johnson managers out there, less so for Felton, who I had to start in a few NFFC leagues. And then we also talked about Travis Homer and DJ Dallas, who both became kind of irrelevant with Rashad Penny back, and with Alex Collins still healthy in that one too. So let's go ahead and kind of dip into the Eagles backfield, which I imagine will be most prominent for people. We have Miles Sanders on a week-to-week basis out with a low ankle sprain. Now enter Kenny Gamewell, who's been our favorite name at running back for about 5 weeks now, and Boston Scott, who reemerged and became relevant again for fantasy purposes after Sanders went down.
Yeah. So that's the big caveat here in this Kenny Gainwell thing is like, listen, the Eagles weren't running the ball really to begin with, right? So, I mean, anyone who's rostered Miles Sanders has felt this pain here. They're just not running the ball, period. So the 5 carries a game that we're going to go to Sanders, do some go to Boston Scott? And I imagine they still stick in a 2-back system, but I just think by default we have to make Kenny Gainwell the top, probably the top overall pickup this week, unless,
right.
I want to say this. After Bipocalypse, everybody in every fantasy league had to make some really difficult cuts last week. So before we even kind of go through these names, I would recommend going back at the transaction log of your league and taking a look at who all got cut, because people had to make tough calls. People had to make very, very tough calls. And there are definitely going to be some people out there who you wouldn't expect to be out there. So definitely, you want to take a look at that first. But anyway, back to Gainwell. He was definitely the guy here. He'll lead the backfield in touches. I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, it was, let's see here. So prior to Sanders leaving, he had 7 touches on 12 snaps, but then he was carted off. After the first quarter, Gainwell played 58% of the snaps, and Scott played 44% of the snaps after the first quarter. So, the fourth quarter nature of this game, has a little bit to do with it.
I tried a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. I try to take that into account, but I mean, there's still no doubt in my mind I'd rather have Gainwell over Scott. And when you look at a lot of the other backs, that we're going to talk about this week, not many of them. Again, it's a grab bag here of guys that we're going to throw some darts at the wall and hope 1 or 2 of them stick. As far as my grab bag goes, but. I mean, Gainwell's the guy just because of opportunity here. So I definitely, it's as simple as that. There's not a ton of super deep analysis in this. He's going to get most of the touches. He catches passes out of the backfield, and he has in the past this season been used in the red zone. So if you're the guy getting 60% of the snaps in this Eagles backfield, then that alone makes you fantasy relevant. Not necessarily because I expect the Eagles to be competitive, but they're going to be the garbage time fantasy kings this year. The other factor is he's got the Gainwell and the Eagles have the Lions in week 8, who are 30th against running backs. And then they've got the Chargers in week 9, who are 31st against running backs. So again, 2 wonderful matchups here to look forward to, mixed with an uptick. I mean, Gainwell was probably started by some people in desperation during Bipocalypse. Now you can actually feel a little bit better about starting him. In our 14-team dynasty league that has, full rosters and 2 flexes, I've started Gainwell a handful of times. And like I said, I'm going to continue to do that. I'll just feel a little bit better about it.
I think there's higher upside for him to do well this week than in past, but you're right. The Boston Scott thing complicates a little bit. Would you recommend fantasy managers could essentially pick up both? Obviously not want to play both, but if you say missed on Gamewell, who I think we both are a little bit higher on, circling back to Boston Scott as a desperate flex play if you really had to, there's worst case scenarios is what I'm kind of hearing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many teams have the luxury of getting to pick up and roster an entire backfield, unless, you got some trash on the bottom of your roster. If, for example, talking about some of the cuts, not to skip around too much, but Malcolm Brown went on IR, Damian Williams hasn't, how much of a factor is he going to be?
Been good, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
Herbert's been good. Yeah, and then you have Ramondre Stevenson being a healthy scratch. You can obviously cut Trey Sermon if you haven't already. Gio Bernard, Mark Ingram, those types of guys. McNichols, if you were rostering, a Henry
with
backup.
Carrington Evans back now. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And Mike Davis, if you're in a shallower league, I think he starts to get into that cut conversation. So yeah, if you're rostering some of those guys, then maybe you can go ahead and pick up 2. But Gainwell is the one that you want to roster for sure.
Yeah. We have to at least mention Michael Carter, who's rostered in 62% of Yahoo leagues, 67 of ESPN, pretty high above our threshold. But I think it more speaks to, again, this week being tough. And you had mentioned it with so many people dealing with Biomageddon last week. There might be some tough cuts that were made, and Michael Carter could be among those players.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, Ty Johnson's in concussion protocol, and Tevin Coleman, I believe, didn't play last week with a hamstring injury. So, yeah, he misses our threshold. But, I saw him. Let me see. I've got the snaps up here. What do we have for the Jets? I mean, Carter was 70.8% of the snaps, and that's with Ty Johnson still playing. Well, I mean, he didn't enter concussion protocol till midway through the first quarter. And, Johnson only played 4 of 18 snaps in the third quarter. So maybe it was trending that way eventually here. So again, there's not really much at all to be excited about this Jets team, given the quarterback situation that we are about to face. But a running back that's taking 70% of the snaps due to circumstance does warrant a little bit of fantasy attention.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention to, I think, the Raiders backfield that has Josh Jacobs to possibly dealing with an injury. I think like Monday, it sounded like the injury wasn't serious, that he could be playing or able to play this next week. Chest contusion, fine. Kenyon Drake finally got some opportunities. We had seen Josh Jacobs miss time earlier this season. It was Peyton Barber all the way. And I think at one point we were both all on board Kenyon Drake being dropped outright. Well, here it ends up being Kenyon Drake getting a lot more involved in this game. I don't know if that's the John Gruden factor or something like that. Like Peyton Barber does seem like a John Gruden guy, but whatever the case, Kenyon Drake did have a pretty big game.
Yeah, so Josh Jacobs has, you're going to see it on the injury report as a chest contusion. Remember, they have a bye week coming up this week. Josh Jacobs, like I said, you'll see it as a chest contusion, but he's probably got 2 or 3 more injuries that he's working back from. The chest contusion is just the latest one that, rises to the top, I guess, in this situation. Jacobs is going to be banged up constantly. Richard, might cut in on some passing down work, but if Jacobs is out, I think for the rest of the season, Drake's probably the guy to roster there. I mean, the rest of this running back list, you want to go quick hitters with this?
Yeah, I think we can quick hit through this too. Yeah.
I wrote down an observation that Samaje Perine was dangerously close to outsnapping Joe Mixon this week. So something to keep in mind. I believe Perine, kind of had that job and then he was hurt or COVID or something like that. And now he's back. It's quite possible Joe Mixon isn't 100% with an ankle injury. So we definitely want to watch that. And I mean, the Bengals do have the Jets this week. So, there's possible 2 backs could get.
That was a surprising blowout last week. And I think it's very possible with the Bengals like a double-digit favorites this week that they could be blowout again. And if you're the Bengals, playoff aspirations now pretty clear, saving Mixon against these lesser teams could be a smarter choice if you're kind of thinking long-term for their season.
Yeah. And then one more guy that I don't know how much we touched on at the very beginning of this segment, because I know we talked about Salvon Ahmed last week. His circumstances definitely changed because Malcolm Brown, who actually got the start and 4 early looks in that matchup here against the Falcons, Malcolm Brown will now be on IR for the rest of the year. Who gets those goal line carries? Because I think Brown was seemingly getting a lot of them. You never know. Myles Gaskin has been just wildly inconsistent this year.
Right.
And even with with Brown taking less than 7% of the snaps, it was Gaskin 63% and Salvon Ahmed 30%. Ahmed got 7 carries and 2 targets, which is now for back-to-back weeks. So he's consistently getting a little bit of volume here. Malcolm Brown was getting 5.3 looks per game. I'm pulling all this from Jerry's backfield breakdown. It's just gold for fantasy, but that's 5 looks to separate between the two. And, I haven't been able to trust Myles Gaskin. Fortunately, I don't have him anywhere. If you're in a spot where you are trusting Myles Gaskin, maybe you want to think about beefing that up or backing that up with Ahmed in this case.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with those guys. And I think Ahmed is going to be more of a lower end $1 to $2 guy if you are in a fab situation, more or less.
Mm-hmm. Also, the last one I'll mention on here, again, this is kind of a warning. Don't go box score chasing and try to pick up JJ Taylor. He scored twice in mop-up duty against the Jets, but he's not suddenly part of this New England backfield.
Yeah, and even Brandon Bolden was scoring in mop-up duty as well, too. I mean, both those guys, the scores were in irrelevant portions of that contest too. Before we move over to the wide receivers, let's get a word from our sponsors, Yahoo. The new NFL season is finally here, and Yahoo's excited to kick off and continue daily fantasy football. There'll be a ton of big prize contests throughout the season on Yahoo, including their multi-entry contest now being shark-free. To celebrate the opening of Yahoo Daily Fantasy Football and the continuation of becoming shark-free, Yahoo is giving all users the opportunity to claim free $10 in contest entry credit. Users can take advantage of this free $10 contest entry credit offer to join one of Yahoo's biggest contests. In addition to the free credit, Yahoo has a $1 million DFS football contest live. The $1 million contest features obviously $1 million in total prizes, including first place receiving $100,000 and an entry to the first ever Yahoo Fantasy Football Championship live finals event, which will occur at the MGM National Harbor in Maryland this December. Play daily fantasy football on Yahoo this season. Visit sports.yahoo.com/dailyfantasy/welcome to claim the free $10 offer to get started. Okay, so we had talked wide receivers last week. Rashad Bateman, Paris Campbell, who had went on injured reserve, Darnell Mooney, Shepard as well. Didn't play. I mean, we had kind of been dealing with the Giants and trying to guess what was going to end up happening. I know that not John Ross, but Dante Pettis had an actually decent game because there were so many people that were missing time from the Giants pass catchers.
Exactly. I mean, they ended up with Darius Slayton getting 9 targets and then Dante Pettis getting 5 targets, which led to one of the touchdowns here. So, if you believe in Danny Dimes as a streamer, find out who's healthy in that receiving core. Yeah. And I think if Shepard's back, he'll be the target hog at least until Tony is able to come back around too. So, we have no idea what kind of health they're in, but we're going to assume that they have enough guys there for Dimes to be, somewhat productive as a streamer there. So we'll knock that bullet point out of the way early there with the Giants options.
Let's talk Cowboys pass catchers sticking the NFC East. It seems like Michael Galp will return off of injured reserve. Speaking of that, somebody mentioned Jerry Jeudy. If that's a pickup, Jerry Jeudy should also be a pickup. He is likely going to be returning from injured reserve as well this week too, but probably rostered in like 70-80% of leagues. Go get Jerry Jeudy. Michael Gallup is a different story. I actually had to cut him in Stake League due to a number of different decisions we have to make with our rosters and limited bench space. I wasn't enamored with Michael Gallup this season. I know others were. That Cowboys offense is obviously electric coming off a bye this week. We know how good Mike McCarthy is off a bye. It's whether or not that workload will be spread around enough where Michael Gallup becomes relevant from a roster perspective. If you're in deeper formats, absolutely. The only issue is he's probably not dropped in deeper formats too.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So, I mean, if anything, Michael Gallup probably kicks Cedric Wilson back down to, special teams and very limited work here. And maybe he cuts the tight ends were getting quite a bit of work lately, but
Dalton Schultz killing it right now.
Yeah, but so in the very first game of the season against Tampa Bay in which he got hurt, he was on the field for 45 snaps and was given 7 targets, caught 4 for 36. Gallup was the guy who they seemed to be using really early on. And he's more of I think I'm going to call him more of a possession receiver, probably more helpful in a PPR guy.
Sure.
I don't see him running a ton of those deep routes. Those deep posts go to CeeDee Lamb, and Cooper's the guy who's usually running the flies. It seems like, just observation, casual.
Yeah, I don't think your assessment's wrong. That's okay.
Exactly. But so no, Gallup definitely has a role, and this is an offense that I find is good. I think the Cowboys are going to go to the playoffs as the best team in this division by a sizable margin, and they're going to continue scoring points, and Gallup's going to get a fair share of them. He's absolutely wide receiver 3 material. Because we're far from done with buys, and it's a long season. Something could always happen, to the rest of those top guys. So I've always believed in Gallup as a good player. Of course, when they drafted CeeDee Lamb, I was like, well, geez, those hopes are going to go out the window a little bit just because there's not going to be enough to go around. But no, I like Gallup as a pickup, only 40% rostered. You could do a lot worse. I would be dropping, for example, I'm going to check to see if he's available in my 10-teamer, and I'll drop Tim Patrick for him, for example.
Yeah. Good. Again, to wrap back to Jerry Jeudy likely returning this week. We would be remiss not to discuss the Packers situation. Our Packers coming off that win Sunday, traveling to what was going to be a big primetime matchup Thursday night against the Cardinals. Now Devonte Adams is in COVID protocol. He is vaccinated, so if he has 2 negative tests over the next 2 days, he could be eligible to play. Seems a little bit unlikely that's going to happen. We don't know if MVS is coming off injured reserve. We don't know if David Bakhtiari is coming off injured reserve. There's a lot of pieces overall of the Packers offense that they could just simply say, oh, you know what? We'll just punt on this game when we're probably seeing the Cardinals later on, not really tip our hand too much. Obviously, you don't want to do like that with Aaron Rodgers and jeopardizing his health. But I just think there could be some gamesmanship overall with the Packers on Thursday.
Yeah, so my crystal ball failed me last week in trying to predict injuries for the Thursday game, with Nick Chubb and all. So I'm not going to try to make any declarations about the future. But one thing I will say is, I've said this before on the show in preparation for this podcast, I checked just about every viable fantasy free agent waiver wire video, watching them all on YouTube, checking all the Twitter feeds, and everything. I sweep everything because I don't want to miss anybody, right? If I've omitted somebody from the outline that we're talking about, it is intentional because I don't think that they're even worth a mention. As you can see when I do these grab bags, some of these are, they're just names to maybe put in the back of your mind in case circumstances change here. But when I was looking at a lot of other resources this week, a lot of people are recommending that we pick up Allen Lazard. And that is, I'm going to warn you as someone who watches, you and I watch the Packers closer than anyone. So if you're ever going to trust our analysis on any team, I think this would be the spot to tune in and tune the volume up and, tell the kids to hush in the back of the car. You're about to hear something important. Allen Lazard is out on the field for more snaps than Devonte Adams, actually 90% of the snaps. And that's been the case in a lot of weeks this year. The reason for that is Allen Lazard is the best blocking receiver in the NFL. I don't know if Pro Football Focus does grades for that. I wouldn't be able to look that up on the fly, but I would not be surprised if he is number 1 because he gets downfield. And, so as someone that, way back in the day, I was a center and I wouldn't always get a nose tackle lined up. So I'd have to go pick a linebacker off. I'm not the fastest or most athletic guy. That is one of the hardest things in any sport that I've ever had to do is to get a linebacker that's got, a second or two faster on their 40 time than me and pick them off in the open field. Allen Lazard makes it look easy, and he's lining up on the outside and picking people off, whether it's setting up screens for Devonte to come right around his block or blocking in the run game. Allen Lazard is an insane blocker. Now, because he's on the field that much, there are definitely chances in which he'll get targets just because he's there. He's on the field. He might get open once in a while. However, I think the big beneficiaries, if Devonte Adams does sit, which of course, I don't know, he could, if I were the Packers, I'd be testing him 1,000 times, just hoping to get a negative to sneak in there. But, he could maybe come back, but probably not. We're going to assume that Devonte is out for this situation. I don't think Lazard necessarily gets a huge target uptick necessarily. Obviously, MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he's had some rapport with Rodgers, of course, over the years. He could be back. I think he would get a big chunk of that play. And honestly, I was pretty low on Randall Cobb to begin the year.
I knew you were going here. Yep.
But this is actually a week where, Randall Cobb will get on the field more and he'll actually get, targets here. He's not the blocker Lazard is. Obviously Cobb is not even anywhere near Devonte at this stage of his career, but I could see a lot more targets, especially if MVS doesn't come back and if Devonte sits. I would start Cobb over Allen Lazard in in just about any situation here, because I think the extra looks will go to Cobb, and the snap count, Lazard will still lead the whole wide receiving core in total snap count, but that doesn't necessarily translate to increased production. Now, could I get burned by this? All it takes is Rodgers to find him on one deep ball. He's the best, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He could find him if he manages to shed his defender and get open on a double move. I won't rule that out completely, but I would say if they play 10 games, with this alignment on Thursday night, Cobb outscores Lazard in 8 of them, just because he's the one that's getting the extra looks as a result of Devonte's absence. I mean, Devonte's top 10 in the league in terms of target share and for wide receivers and all those extra fun metrics that Jerry likes to use on his article. Devonte is the highest usage rate here. So we need someone that's going to get targets and have their role actually change and evolve. And I think that could be Cobb.
So there's a lot to unpack with this. And I think we could spend some time because we already breezed through the running backs. I mean, there really is not a lot of top pickups to make. And I think people are going to be confused about this Packer situation, and they're going to look at the snap count thing and think, yes, Lazard's got to be the next guy up if Devonte Adams is out. And you are 100% correct about his blocking prowess. You pointed to running outside and making the blocks, and that might be so. I always think of what the Packers believe Lazard to be as a blocker when you watch them in the red zone. I can't tell you how many times this season alone I've watched them motion Lazard from the outside in, and when they are doing those shotgun dives to Aaron Jones, they'll have Lazard more or less chip a running back, chip an end, or get in there as an additional blocker. That is the value that Alan Lazard possesses. Yeah. That is better than most in the NFL, and the red zone in particular is huge. Now, the Packers over the last 2 weeks have built off of that by using him as a red zone option. I mean, he's gotten 5 targets and 6 targets over the past 2 weeks. Not a lot, but he scored 2 touchdowns. I think this is in some ways trying to build confidence to Lazard. Much in the same way that they got MVS going towards the end of the playoff run last year, and MVS was huge down the stretch. I think this is kind of a way to get Lazard feeling a little bit more comfortable himself and confident. That's great. I think that they do need to do that if they have championship aspirations. Yeah, but you hit the nail right on the head. Hold on. Randall Cobb is going to be the biggest difference maker. And I think of him, we've talked about before, the Hunter Renfrow points, right? You get 5 catches, 50 yards in a full point PPR league. That's Hunter Renfrow numbers. That's Randall Cobb's floor. And we've seen it already, even though Cobb has been gone from the Packers for the past couple of years. He and Rodgers have such an innate connection and are able to do things so well. Isaiah Simmons and those other fast linebackers are probably going to be tasked with covering Robert Tonyan, who had a big game this past week. I think Randall Cobb in that middle of the field is going to be a huge factor. And if he ends with something like 6 for 70, that will be like I'll be surprised that that's all he did. I think if the Packers are competitive, it's Randall Cobb was the biggest day.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely give you that here. The last couple things on Lazard. Yeah, he's scored in back-to-back weeks here. 2 of the worst 3 defenses against opposing wide receivers in the league. So we'll throw, so that definitely helps the case of the numbers looking a little bit better lately. And man, I just wanted to say it's a shame that, okay, never mind. I shouldn't say it's a shame because they did this rule for a reason. But remember when wide receivers could crack block defensive ends? If they could still do that, Lazard would be murdering people this year, and it would be so fun to watch. But, alas, the evolution of football here. But
one other step I want to make, and this doesn't really impact from a waiver wire perspective, Devonte Adams missed, I think, really specifically that primetime match against the Chiefs. And who had the biggest game then? Aaron Jones. I think Aaron Jones actually gets split out wide a lot more often if Devonte Adams is out. And by default, A.J. Dillon, I think, will get a lot more opportunities. Maybe not carry the ball. I think he's just going to get more snaps. Yeah. I think A.J. Dillon is so talented that if you say, hey, he's getting 10 to 15 more snaps, that might make me consider him as a flex option if I was pressed for action. Only 2 teams on bye. Maybe you're not dealing with that, but I think this could be a better A.J. Dillon game as well with Aaron Jones out wide.
If it were PPR, I still think I'd flex Cobb. So the 2 big takeaways here is to not get too lofty expectations for Lazard, and suddenly Cobb's a flexible play, especially in PPR. I think those are the big ones.
Yeah. Last wide receiver to mention, because we already talked about Dante Pettis and the Giants pass catchers a little bit earlier. Russell Gage finally had a decent enough outing. We had Kyle Pitts reemerge, made sure that he can actually perform in North America. It's not just Europe where he could do well in. And Calvin Ridley kind of doing some things as well too, but Russell Gage kind of a bigger factor. I'll be honest, I don't want many shares of this Falcons offense. I think it's Patterson, I think it's Ridley, and it's Kyle Pitts. And after that, I'm less interested. But Russell Gage maybe is taking advantage of his number 2 role with as a wide receiver with the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, people were Gage is definitely the number 2 receiver. After the bye week, he came back. He had almost triple the snaps of Tajay Sharp and had triple the snaps of Olamide Zaccheaus. So, he's right out there. But the thing is with Kyle Pitts, he plays like a receiver. He's the number 2 receiver. They line him out wide so much, and I'm actually worried in my keeper league that he might lose his tight end eligibility. Seriously, the way his alignment, maybe it takes something a little bit more. It's not quite Marquez Colston like, if you remember that, if you've been playing long enough. But we're not that far off here, and I don't want to jinx the fantasy gods and put that out there. But if this keeps up, I wouldn't be surprised. But still, Russell Gage could be a little bit sneaky. I mean, he brought in 4 of his 6 targets for 67 yards and a touchdown. And let's see here the matchups that they have coming up, if they're any good. Carolina, a little tough. The Saints against receivers, Cowboys, Patriots, 3 of the next 4, I guess, are bottom third defenses against wide receivers. So, maybe there's some decent matchups in there, but I don't know. He's someone that's rosterable and you keep him around. Again, if we're going to call it the Hunter Renfrow line this year, I think he's right at that line. So there's some fantasy utility there.
I completely agree. Randall Cobb, one of the bigger winners if Devonte Adams were to be missing time. Packers fans, big losers there. I think football fans might be big losers too, because that's a good game that could be bad depending on what the Packers choose to do. All right, let's move over to tight ends and defenses. Before we do that, a word from our sponsors, Thrive Fantasy. Thrive is back for another fantasy season, and they're running huge guaranteed contests each week this NFL. With Thrive Fantasy, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Sign up today and get a free 6-month RotoWire subscription right now. Here's how you claim your RotoWire subscription. Visit rotowire.com/thrive, deposit a minimum of $10, and receive a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. And you can play in your first paid contest and receive a free 6-month RotoWire subscription. Again, that's going to rotowire.com/thrive. You deposit a minimum of $10 and receive a 100% deposit up to $100, as you say. And again, if you just play in their first paid contest, you'll get that free 6-month RotoWire subscription. Okay, so tight ends, we're missing Mark Andrews. We're missing Darren Waller. Well, it's tough because Darren Waller didn't play this past week. You can't really use Foster Moreau, who might have helped you this past week too. It's a little bit tough. It's CJ Uzomah and then like anything else besides him.
Yeah. This is actually it's a pretty difficult situation here because, of course, like you said, Foster Moreau would be helpful if they were playing this week,
right?
But so like, how are you realistically going to handle that? I have Waller in one league. I can't afford to pick up Moreau and have them both on my bench this week. I just can't. I started a guy on bye and stake league this week purposely, so I didn't have to cut Michael Thomas, and that decision could come back to burn me later on here, but we'll see. So tough roster decisions. I don't think you can roster 2 tight ends from the same team on a bye. So Moreau will probably, unless someone's just, got bench spots to burn, suddenly woke up week 8 and decided I'm going to do waivers, chances are that they're not going to be picked up. Uzomah is the interesting one because I, in my head, have always thought of him as like maybe a fringe red zone guy, probably a good blocker, but there's a lot of things that are going well for him in this case. Out of all the pass catchers in Cincinnati last week, Uzomah was on the field for the second highest amount of snaps, only trailing Jamar Chase. So Uzomah was on the field more than Tyler Boyd and more than T. Higgins, more than Joe Mixon, more than Sample, P. Ryan, Auden Tate, the whole deal here. So, Uzomah's 1, he's on the field, and 2, he's running routes on 94.4% of his of his snaps. So out of 162 plays, passing plays, he's ran routes on 153 of them, been targeted 19 times. And that's, once you take out the 100% guys that have, like 12 or less targets, he's definitely, Uzomah's like, that's a top 10 rate. So not only is he on the field a ton, he's running routes on passing plays, and that's defied my conventional logic of Uzomah. So I would say that it's very fair to put him into in a pickup consideration at tight end this week. And he's only rostered 10% of both leagues with people on bye. Again, this is a tight end bye week, right? With Andrews and Waller off, he's a guy that you shouldn't have to pay a premium for still, because a lot of people, I think, still see that name and think, CJ Uzomah, might blow up for a week or 2, but it's not going to last, right? You can probably throw him out there this week and take your points. And if he has another good week, you can keep him and maybe flex him in an emergency down the road.
So I'll give you this one. I've seen a lot of Robert Tonyan when I've been looking at my leagues available on waiver wire with Devonte Adams out. Would you go with Tonyan or would you go with Uzomah?
I think that I would actually go with Uzoma because Tunyon, of course, the week after we say we could probably catch him, he actually has his good week. Still, it was only 5 targets. I mean, in the last 4 weeks before that, he had 32 yards combined here.
Right.
So I feel like chasing, it's a little bit of box score chasing if you go back to Tanya, number one. And number two, okay, this is a weird stat, sample size, over 7 weeks, but Arizona is the toughest defense against fantasy tight ends this year. They are ranked number one.
It's crazy after many years where they were the worst, right? Now we're finally dealing with one of the best. Shocking what speed at linebacker does. Packers, listen up. Shocking.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I mean, the Packers linebackers have outperformed everything, that I thought they would. But yeah, the Cardinals, it's actually by a pretty sizable margin here, too. Fantasy points per game. They're giving up in 7 games. They're giving up 2.2 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Wow. That's standard format. And let me see, PPRs, I'd imagine is going to be
can't be that much.
They're actually the fifth lowest in PPR as far as points per. Actually, know what? I lied. The page on RotoWire it refreshes. They're still number one. 5.5 fantasy PPR points to opposing tight ends. That's 1.7 points less than number 2. So I mean, that's almost a full standard deviation above the next worst here. And you can joke about these numbers, when we're 2-3 weeks in, but I think there's some meaning here at week 7. So hey, fantasy football stats guy, he's got 5.4. Our guys, like I said, our guys calculate 5.5, probably just a rounding error, but no. So anyway, bad matchup, and again, your box score chasing a little bit with Tanya, even though some of these other receivers could be possibly out. So I still think I like Uzoma because he did it with 3 very healthy Cincinnati receivers, and in a week where Chase had 200 yards.
I like that. Good analysis there. From a streaming defense perspective, I think it's pretty cut and dry. You Bengals pick up against Joe Flacco or Mike White. You might consider the Chargers against Mac Jones and company. But I think just overall, there's a few key places. You could go either way with the Seahawks, Jacksonville Jaguars, given how bad that team. I would prefer the Bengals, clearly. But I think those other 3 that I mentioned, kind of all decent top 12 plays.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, we didn't give Tommy Sweeney for the Bills any love. Remember, Dawson Knox has a broken hand. If you need a flyer, a dart throw, 2 tight end league, that kind of thing. You think about Tommy Sweeney, I guess, here. But yeah, anyway, you nailed it with streaming defenses. I think the Bengals are number 1 across the board, whether it's Joe Flacco or whether it's Mike White. The Bengals, the only box they don't check is they're on the road, but the over-under in that game is 43.5. So that's one that's going to be my top 1 priority. I'm still not using fab dollars on it, but I'm putting the Bengals first. And then after that, I think I'm going back to the Seahawks against Jacksonville. They're the home team, another over-under 43.5 game. And I know the weather maybe helped out a little bit on Monday night, but the Seahawks defense actually looked pretty decent, especially at defending runs between the tackles. So, maybe they can bottle up James Robinson a little bit because he's the best player, I think, on that offense here for now. So it's Bengals then Seahawks for me. And if you really want to get cute, the Chargers, they're home against the Pats. Chiefs at home against the Giants. I've seen a couple people bring up, but I'm not messing around with the Chiefs at all. Over under 52. I jotted down Philly at Detroit just because Detroit's bad, but so's Philly, so I wouldn't mess with that either. It's Bengals or Seahawks or bust for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you on that. We have a little bit of time, so I want to bring up one question I thought was interesting. Forget the way in which Deontay Johnson was spelled, but look at this trade on our site, or I'm sorry, on the live broadcast right now. Deontay Johnson and Kyle Pitts for Darren Waller and Keenan Allen. I know you're high on Deontay Johnson. Is this which side of this is better in your opinion?
Oh, hell yeah. I'm very high on Deontay Johnson, and that's not going away. Maybe I didn't mention him the past week, but I take the Deontay Johnson and Pitts side here, and I'm pretty confident about it, too. I want the Deontay Pitts side because, again, Waller's banged up, and he's on a bye week. Pitts is off his bye week. You get him there, the rest of the year. So that's just a little bit tipping the scales. And the way that Kyle Pitts is being used is insane. It's like having a wide receiver 2 or 3 in your tight end spot. And Deontay Johnson will lead the league the rest of the way out in targets. You can mark my words on that. That's my thoughts are.
I think you asked this trade 4 weeks ago, and I might be a little bit different. Kyle Pitts was struggling then. I was pretty certain Ben Roethlisberger stinks, and maybe Juju Smith-Schuster is going to get involved more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Juju
pretty
Smith-Schuster's
certain Ben
gone.
Roethlisberger stinks too, but if he targets one guy 15 times, that guy's a good fantasy asset.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's exactly why Najee Harris is as good as he is too in fantasy. Not because of talent, I can tell you that right now, but from opportunity. And now Kyle Pitts is getting more involved too. This is a no-brainer to me. I think you take the Deontay Johnson, Kyle Pitts side every time. And I do like Darren Waller, and I do like Keenan Allen, but I think there's unequivocally the right way, and at least it's trending that way in Deontay Johnson and Kyle Pitts as well too. So that was one of the questions I just thought was a little bit interesting. It was why I had a bit more time, but that does it for us on the RotoWire NFL Tuesday edition of the Waiver Wire podcast. Daniel Jones, Randall Cobb,
Kenny some
Gamewell,
sneaky ones.
Not some crazy big names, but hopefully ones that can help you in your fantasy lineups this week.
Let me sneak a couple plugs in here before we wrap this up.
I need my UFC content.
First off, fantasy football stats guy. The Rams are 99% rostered. Of course, you picked them up against Houston if you wanted to. I wanted to address that quick. I don't see any other questions that we didn't get to. You didn't let me have my Allen Robinson, why we should drop him this week's segment. But yes, you can drop Allen Robinson. And of course. So last thing, we got back-to-back UFC pay-per-views. So right after this, I'm going to do a show with John and our Fight IQ guys are going to be back on Friday. We're going to have 2 betting articles and a bunch of DFS articles up on the website for UFC 267 and then UFC 268 the next week. We're going Fight Island to Madison Square Garden back-to-back weeks. Thank you for letting me have my UFC rant. I really appreciate you guys checking out the content over there too. Gotta love the little passion project here. Of course, we're always here for football number one, but the rest of my week after this show, actually, I got one more podcast through tomorrow, football related, but the rest of my week's all UFC. So hopefully you guys will lend me a hand and check that out. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We missed Ian today, but we still got a nice amount of comments and we love that. So thanks everybody for chipping in and helping drive the discussion in what was otherwise, a generally light waiver wire period, but hopefully we threw out enough names to give you some options.